Hey, welcome to the video on reading SI calipers. So to read a caliper, there are two steps. We have a fixed scale and we have a moving scale. Our first step is to read the value on the fixed scale that is located exactly at or to the left of the zero on the moving scale. So what are the fixed scale and the moving scales? Let's have a look at a caliper. Here's an example of an SI caliper. This would be the fixed scale. And this would be the moving scale. So if we go back here, we have a look at our first instructions. It says read the value on the fixed scale that is located exactly at or to the left of the zero on the moving scale. So let's have a look at this caliper. If I look at the moving scale, I look at the zero. Here's the zero on the moving scale. And where does that line up on our fixed scale here? Well, that lines up right in here. So where is that? If each of these is a millimeter, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we're somewhere between 8 and 9 millimeters. So we're between 8 millimeters and 9 millimeters. Okay, so what does that mean? That means our reading is 8 something. We're 8 something millimeters. Right, so we're at 8 something millimeters. So the idea of the moving scale here is to tell us, well, how far past 8 millimeters are we? How far have we gone past 8 millimeters? And that's where we come into the second step in reading an SI caliper, or any caliper for that matter. Identify the next line on the moving scale that aligns with a line on the fixed scale. So they have to line up. So if we go back to our example here, and I look, I have an arrow here indicating, look at this line. Look how nicely it lines up with this line on the fixed scale. So this line on the moving scale lines up very nicely with this line on the fixed scale. This is the first line that does so. That one doesn't line up. That one doesn't line up. Neither does that. Neither does that. Okay, so these may look like they do, okay, but they don't. Here we have this one right here is the first one that lines up. So what does that tell us? Well, we need to know what each of these little ticks on the moving scale is worth. Okay, and as the caliper moves, what happens is these ticks farther along will start to line up. How many ticks do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. It's going to take us 20 ticks to get to the next millimeter. So a millimeter here is divided into 20 parts. So we have here for our step 2, a millimeter is divided into 20 parts. So what does that mean? What is one tick worth then? If a millimeter is divided into 20 parts, that means one tick on the moving scale is equal to 1/20th of a millimeter, or 0.05 millimeters. So if I've gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ticks, because this is where it lines up right here, if I've gone 7 ticks past 8 millimeters, so I've got 7 ticks past 8 millimeters, and each of those ticks is worth 0.05 millimeters. That's 8 times 0.05. Oh, sorry, not 8, 7. 7 ticks. 8 millimeters. 7 ticks passed. So 7 ticks passed. Each of those ticks is worth 0.05 millimeters. That is 0.35 millimeters past 8 millimeters. So our final reading, final reading becomes 8 millimeters plus 0.35 millimeters, which is 8.35 millimeters. Now you'll notice if we go up here that the way this is numbered makes it really easy to actually read right away, so I don't have to actually go and do that multiplication there. Each of these numbers represents 0.1 millimeters. Here's the millimeter up here. Each of these is a 0.1, and each of these 0.1s is divided into 2 parts, so that would be 0.05. So this would be 0.35. So I could read just off of that without actually having to do that multiplication. But this gives us a really good understanding of how the caliper works. As we might have an example for that's where this is divided into more parts, and maybe we do have to do this calculation to find out what each of these ticks is worth. So let's do another example. Looking right here, step number one was to look at where the 0 on the moving scale lines up with the fixed scale. So we're somewhere here between 10 and 11 millimeters. Okay, so we are 10 millimeters to 11 millimeters, or somewhere in between there. How far past 10 millimeters? Well, I can actually tell from the 0 that we're not that far past. It looks like we're less than halfway, but we want to know exactly how far past, and that's what the moving scale is going to tell us. So what we're going to do here is we're going to look at where it lines up, and I have a little arrow here to indicate where the next tick on the moving scale lines up with a tick on the fixed scale, and that happens right here on the 3. Okay, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 ticks. Okay, so I can think of it that way. 6 ticks, and each of them are 0.05. Okay, so I can say 6 ticks past 10 millimeters. And each tick is 0.5, so that's 6 times 0.05. Sorry, 0.05 millimeters, which is equal to 0.3, okay, millimeters. And what we're going to do here is we're going to actually add the 0 here. And the reason we're going to add the 0 here is because this is what we would call a 0.05 caliper, meaning it is measuring to 2 decimal places of accuracy. Okay, so when I do my final reading, is going to be 10 plus 0.30, so it's going to be 10.30. I'm going to keep this 0 here to tell the reader that, so this is millimeters, okay, to tell the reader that this is accurate to 2 decimal places. Okay, so let's do one more example. Okay, this one's a little bit different. Okay, fixed scale's the same. I have all millimeters here, but if you look at the moving scale, this is divided into a lot more parts, right? So how many we have here? Well, I can kind of see, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So I still have those numbers, and each of those numbers does still refer to 0.1, but each of those 0.1s is divided up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to reach the next 0.1. I've got a total of 50. This is divided into 50 sections. So here was is divided, each millimeter, right, is divided into 50 parts. Okay, which means that each tick is equal to 1 over 50 millimeters, or 0.02. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this reading all in one step this time. So this is 0.02 millimeters. So step number 1, I'm going to look at the 0, see where it lines up. It lines up 1, 2, 3, somewhere between 3 and 4. How far past? 3.33234. 3.34 millimeters. Okay. Now, if you weren't able to follow me as I read that right away off, okay, we can still do it this way. We know step 1, we're between 3 millimeters and 4 millimeters. Oops. And step 2, we want to know, well, how many ticks am I past? Where does that line up? Well, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 ticks. So I get 17 times 0.02. Okay. And what is that equal to? Well, that's equal to 0.34. So my final reading, still 3.34 millimeters. Okay. And that is how you read SI calipers. We're going to do a different video for the imperial calipers, and the only reason for that is because then we really have to add at the end because we're dealing with fractions. It doesn't work very nicely with the decimal numbers. So that shortcut method I showed you, you can't really do that with the imperial calipers. You really are going to wind up having to do it in the 2 separate parts and adding.